Dean Cammy and Daniel Allegre, Manhattan Project documentary. Introduction. The Manhattan Project developed nuclear weapons for the United States during World War II as it faced off against the Axis powers, Germany, Japan, and Italy. At the time, the U.S. needed an effective way to secure victory and to send a warning to the USSR that the U.S. was militarily dominant. By creating nuclear weapons, Manhattan Project lifted the United States to a position of world leader. The U.S. government had both the right to defend its national security after the attack on Pearl Harbor and the responsibility of defeating the Axis powers. This development of the bomb sparked discussions about ethics of creation and use of nuclear weapons. However, our supporters argue that the United States was justified in dropping the nuclear bombs on Japan because it saved lives by not letting the war drag on, and it resulted in peace.
Nuclear fusion and nuclear fission. There were two different paths that scientists could take, one of which is the use of uranium-235 isotope, and the other is plutonium, which was a brand new element that was just been discovered. The atomic bomb, being the first of its kind, had no guarantee that it would lead to a successful detonation. Another key part of the project was to establish 3 sites that could be used to help work and support the project. There were also many other smaller sites, nationwide and globally. A nuclear weapon is specifically designed to release energy. On the other hand, nuclear fusion is a merging of 2 processes. Additionally, atomic bombs are also called fusion weapons, and vice versa. Other names, such as hydrogen bomb and thermomolecular bombs, also called fusion bomb weapons. They can also be categorized under nuclear weapons, where a part of the energy is released by nuclear fusion.
Connection to rights and responsibilities. The U.S. government. The Manhattan Project is connected to important ideas about rights and responsibilities. During World War II, the U.S. believed it had the right to defend itself against the Axis powers and take responsibility to save American soldiers' lives. The use of nuclear weapons in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was seen as a way to stop the war quickly, potentially saving millions more American, Japanese, German, and others who could have been lost if the conflict continued.
However, scientists at Manhattan Project faced an unprecedented ethical dilemma, as their work created the most destructive weapon in history. While their work began as a desperate race to build atomic weapons against Nazi Germany, the project successfully confronted them with a conflicting moral question no humans had previously faced, and this ethical question remains unsolved. Do these weapons of mass destruction ever truly serve as guarantors of peace, or does their existence continue to cycle of fear and violence they were meant to end? For nuclear scientists, this advancement became the model for modern technological advancement. The technological frontier continues between creation and destruction.
Workers, races, and homes. Workers need a place to stay. Therefore, private firms created homes for them in small communities. The Oak Ridge population soared to about 75,000, while other work sites populations like Los Alamos and Hanford saw their population rise from 6,000 to 15,000. There are different races of workers throughout the entirety of the project. Workers for the Manhattan Project were mainly just white males, but there were also many females, Hispanics, Native Americans, and African Americans. Unfortunately, the African Americans faced Jim Crow racism. Most of the African Americans worked on the metallurgical laboratory at the University of Chicago, Illinois.
Locations for development. Los Alamos, New Mexico in 1943. General Groves had a brilliant bomb design and development laboratory in Los Alamos, New Mexico. The scientist leader of this site was the world-famous J. Robert Oppenheimer, who had a movie about it. The laboratory was built atop a Parhito Plateau. Later in 1944, the scientists tested the bomb. This bomb became the first man-made nuclear explosion. Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Oak Ridge, Tennessee was one of the 3 main sites for the project. The scientists chose this location due to it being rich in uranium. It later became the headquarters of the entire project as a result of containing a surplus of uranium. They were technologically used to pursue in parallel, along with a pilot reactor and chemical separation plant. These were made to make a certain amount of plutonium. Hanford, Washington. Half a year after the workers had begun digging in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, there was yet another site for plutonium built in Hanford, Washington. Even though there were many workers, the operation was slow and challenging. In the middle of the year 1945, there was finally enough plutonium and uranium to construct the first atomic bomb ever.
Test of the first and second bomb. On July 16, 1945, approximately 5:30 in the morning, an atomic bomb named Trinity by Mr. Oppenheimer was tested. It was dropped 193 kilometers from the site, 100 feet in the air. The scientists who watched the explosion had to stay 10,000 yards away to avoid injury. When dropped, a ball of fire lit up the morning sky, along with a giant mushroom smoke cloud. The bomb itself had the power equivalent of 15,000 to 20,000 tons of TNT. The next month, after the first test, 2 new bombs were dropped. The first used uranium-235, and the second one used plutonium. They were both successful. And the Little Boy bomb was the first bomb to be dropped on Hiroshima. Hiroshima was chosen as the main target due to military value and that it provided to Japan. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber released the bomb from a height of 1,900 feet in the air. The bomb instantly killed 70,000 and left many in critical condition. By the end of the year 1945, the death toll had risen to 140,000. 3 days after the Little Boy bombing in the United States, Soviet Union declared war on Japan. At 11:02 a.m., a bomb nicknamed Fat Man was dropped from 1,650 feet northwest of Kokura towards the center. Around 40,000 people were killed upon impact, and 30,000 people died later due to injuries. At the end of the bombing, 40% of all the city's buildings were either destroyed or badly damaged. Due to having wars being declared upon their soil, the massive destruction being dropped in 3 days, the Japanese surrendered.
Explosions and aftermath. The Manhattan Project had a huge impact. On July 16, 1945, the Trinity test marked the first successful explosion of a nuclear bomb in the New Mexico desert, releasing a blinding flash and a mushroom cloud that stretched miles into the sky, proving that weapons' devastating power. Later that year, the U.S. dropped bombs on Hiroshima on August 6 and Nagasaki on August 9, ending the war, but causing massive destruction. The human toll was 200,000 Japanese and 50,000 Koreans. The environmental consequences were severe, with radiation poisoning humans, land, and water, killing plants and animals, and leaving long-lasting effects on areas hit. On August 14th, 5 days after the dropping of the second bomb, called Fat Man, on Nagasaki, Japan surrendered unconditionally. The Second World War was over.
Manhattan Project scientists. Scientists like J. Robert Oppenheimer, Enrico Fermi, and other leading scientists in the Manhattan Project had big responsibilities but very limited rights. They were in charge of building the atomic bomb, making sure the science worked, and keeping everything safe and secret. After the Trinity test, Oppenheimer quoted the Bhagavad Gita, saying, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." The Bhagavad Gita is the Hindu scripture. He said this because he realized he had made a weapon that could destroy all life on Earth, yet he had no say in what and how the bomb was to be used. They couldn't share their work with others, even other scientists, or talk openly about the bomb's dangers because of strict secrecy rules. This made it hard for them to raise concerns about the bomb's impact, even though many felt worried about its power. Their rights to speak freely or act on their worries were restricted to keep the project secret and on track. Also, later he said to President Truman, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." This quote shows Oppenheimer's concern for how the bombs were going to be used. People living near Trinity sites, living near test sites, like the Trinity site in New Mexico, had no idea what was happening because the government used various techniques to hide the truth. They were told the tests were just regular military work or accidents, like explosions from a weapons depot. The government kept the nuclear weapon test secret, controlling information and blocking access to the areas. This meant locals didn't know about the risks like radiation, leaving them in the dark and unsafe. The scientists' limited rights and the people's ignorance show how much control the government had to keep the Manhattan Project hidden.
Conclusion. The Manhattan Project turned the United States into the world's leading power by building nuclear bombs. It was right for the U.S. to protect itself and work to create peace by stopping the Axis powers. Germany, Japan, and Italy dropping the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki ended World War II quickly, which saved many lives. But those bombs could cause huge destruction and made people question whether nuclear bombs were moral. The project was kept secret by people like General Groves, who prevented scientists like J. Robert Oppenheimer from speaking freely about their worries. This showed the difficulty of balancing nationalism with doing what's right. The Manhattan Project showed both the strength and the danger of nuclear weapons.
So what? Imagine an unstable country like Iran getting nuclear bombs and using them on countries like Israel. The destruction would be immeasurable on cities like Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. If the bombs were dropped, the ancient city with all of its synagogues, historic artifacts, and locations would be destroyed. Tel Aviv, the capital of Israel, would also be demolished. Its skyscrapers, businesses, and beaches would be vaporized. The bombs would leave behind radiation, poisoning the air, water, and ground. This would make it impossible for people to live in the promised land for a long time. Iran is an arrogant country with a hubris-filled dictator. As he publicly stated, Iran's supreme leader might want to use bombs to eradicate all Jews. If Jerusalem and Tel Aviv were hit, it wouldn't just hurt Israel. It could start another world war. The Manhattan Project showed how powerful nuclear bombs can cause around the world with one wrong move.